New York State Senator Kevin Parker, representing the 21st Senate District in the Empire State, which contains parts of Brooklyn, joins us now on Decision Makers. He is also chairman of the Senate's Committee on Energy and Telecommunications. All right, Senator, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Charles. I appreciate it.
All right. So several months ago, the legislature passed a nearly $250 billion budget for this state for fiscal year 2025 and 26. How is that beginning to unfold from your view in terms of the priorities that were highlighted and shaped in it?
Well, the state of New York has like the 12th largest economy in the entire world, right? We have an economy a little larger than Spain, right? And so this is like a monumental task. I tell everybody all the time that, our job as legislators is kind of two parts when it comes to the budget, right? The first is to get money into the budget and then get that money into your district, which is the harder task. I think this year we did a fairly good job at, obviously the challenge this year um, is obviously dealing with all of these cuts that are coming from the federal government and also trying to, and at the time that we passed the budget, which was around May,
Mhm.
that was, we still hadn't had the federal bill yet that cut Medicaid and stuff. So we were trying to anticipate that and hopefully that we were able to kind of inoculate our state a little bit from those devastating cuts.
Mhm. What were the specific issues? So I know you mentioned Medicaid, Medicare, but what were some other specific issues that kind of worried you the most, or still worry you, keep you kind of up at night?
Yeah, well, in the state of New York, we have this practice that I'm not necessarily fond of passing large policy issues within the context of the budget, right? So they attach things to the budget, that everybody has to vote for, and you just wind up kind of swallowing these things along with everything else. One of those things that they were looking at was getting rid of cell phones in schools, which was a little controversial. The governor also was looking at trying to create civil confinement for people with mental health issues, which was a really, really, really big concern. We did do something on it, but not nearly where the governor was trying to go with it. We did eliminate cell phones in schools, and so different schools are using different modalities starting August, September, as scholars go back into classrooms to limit access to phones during the school day. Um, and in addition to that, there were some issues around, you know, dealing with, speedy trial and some of the issues around evidence, what they call discovery.
Mhm.
And so we wanted to make sure that we were creating a balance between having a judicial system in which prosecutors weren't able to hold up or hold back evidence, and simultaneously making sure that DAs had the tools and the resources that they needed in order to do proper prosecutions of people who may be dangerous to the community or themselves.
Yeah, you have this very acrimonious relationship between the legislature and also the new administration, between the Trump administration. So, talk a little bit, if you will, about those dynamics and also, if at all, how that influences or shapes the relationship between Democrats and Republicans in the legislature, especially since New York is a Democratic state.
Yeah, New York is a very Democratic state, and frankly, the Republicans are irrelevant. And they don't have the votes to stop anything in committee or to even to stop anything on the floor. The most they can do is run out the time by debating a bill to the limit or whatever that time limit is. I think it's like 3 hours, right? And so at the end of the day, the relationship between Republicans, they've gotten in the beginning they were getting a little feisty because off the Trump win, they were feeling themselves a little bit, as my mother used to say. But I think we quickly put them in their place and passed all the things that we needed to pass by showing them that we're going to just stick to the rules and we're going to just proceed in a professional legislative way, which is what we did both in committee and on the floor. Um, but let's be clear. The state of New York does not have an acrimonious relationship with the Trump administration. Trump has an acrimonious relationship with the U.S. Constitution and every state in the nation, including the red states, whether they recognize it or not. We are in a full constitutional crisis. And whether anybody believes that or not, or whether anybody's acting on it or not, is a different question. But we are in that moment. And at the moment that you have had somebody like him successfully be able to capture all three branches of the government, in this case, the Supreme Court and the Congress, and then use that power for nefarious purposes, as you're seeing every day, everything from the illegal way that they are rounding up people around immigration. And I say people, I'm not even talking about migrants, I'm not talking about immigrants, because they're now, looking to pick up people who are U.S. citizens. They're now talking about, unnaturalizing people, like words that we've never even heard before. Like this is just, it's absolutely insane, some of the things that they're doing. What we saw with the cuts to Medicaid and Medicare, because it's going to cut both, is something that's absolutely, I think, devastating for the country, not let alone New York State. And Frank, we're going to be better than most places. But the amount of money that this is going to cost the state of New York is a catastrophic amount of money.
Mm.
And particularly because it's cut out of one specific area and for community that, or sets of communities that are the neediest in our state and in any state, right? And
Yeah.
so, when you generally have let's say a deficit in your budget, a lot of times you can figure out ways to spread that money. So if like, we have a $2 billion or $3 billion deficit, which we haven't had in a long time in the state of New York. This is just hypothetical. We could figure out ways to say, okay, you know what, we're going to hold education harmless, we're going to hold healthcare harmless. Let's find other ways to kind of spread out the harm. This, because it's so targeted and so deep in that one area, it becomes more of a challenge to, in fact, spread those cuts around to other areas that could endure those cuts without harm, more easily, right? Like economic development, right? Like, you obviously want to, inspire and encourage business in your state, but, not giving multinational companies millions of dollars in tax breaks is a way that you can actually make money, right? For the state. So, and then simultaneously, you just can't, continue to tax people because the federal government, has taken money from you. So it's a balancing act. We're still talking through what this is going to mean, but understand like this is not a New York thing. This is a national thing that this federal administration has put on people all over the country.
Now, how are your constituents reacting to this budget? I mean, do they even understand what's happening, what's in it? How do you even communicate with them about that?
The state budget, you talk my
The
state budget,
state budget,
not the
right,
budget.
right, right.
Yeah, let me say this. They are not as concerned as they should be, to be honest with you. Honestly, people are living life, and people are trying to make a dollar out of 15 cents and,
Mhm.
catching hell trying to keep a roof on their head and closing the backs of themselves and their children and food on the table. And so they elect me, and my 151 other colleagues in the state legislature um, to deal with this issue, right? And so, I think that they trust us a little bit, but I do spend a lot of time communicating to what's happening in the budget. One of the things that I try to do is send out a budget letter at the end of the budget that kind of outlines the broad strokes of the things that I think are important for my district and my constituents, as well as attending, things like we have community boards, so going to community board meetings, block association meetings, tenant association meetings, and any place that two or three are gathered in my district, I try to be there and talk about the budget so that folks are being informed about what's happening with their tax dollars, right? And I feel like that's my responsibility to communicate that.
And looking at other issues, you're chairman of Committee on Energy Telecommunications. So, what are those top ones for your committee right now? What will be the next big issues moving forward?
Yeah, well, the top three issues in the telecom and the Energy and Telecom Committee in the Senate is affordability, and affordability, right? Like it's really just the thing right now. Right now, we're in a deep affordability crisis, not just here in the state of New York or the city of New York, but nationally. And
Mhm,
so I've spent a lot of time over the last 3 or 4 years looking at ways that we can, in fact, reduce the amount of money that people are
mhm,
paying for both their utilities and access to high-speed broadband. Access to high-speed broadband now, Charles, as you know, has become as important as water, heat, electricity, right? In the same way
right.
in the state of New York, we would not put somebody into a house or apartment without water, heat, and electricity. Now high-speed broadband has kind of reached that level as well, where you literally almost can't operate in the
Mhm.
world unless you have high-speed broadband. And so that's been And then making sure it's affordable, right? Affordable high-speed broadband, right? Because getting it is less of a problem than it is paying for it. But
Mhm.
there's also a lot of places, both in rural areas and deep urban areas, where access to high-speed broadband and things like FiOS are really a challenge. And so we were tackling the affordability crisis, tackling the access to high-speed broadband
Mhm.
issue. But also, we have something called the CLCPA here in the state of New York, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is the boldest and most audacious set of climate goals in the entire country. And trying to get there is a challenge. And I think that the biggest challenge in this moment is really about generation, right? And sustainable generation. And right now we're in a vigorous, conversation in our state about that generation. How do you develop it? And we're being hindered as we do that with the federal government shutting down by denying us permits to do offshore wind. Um, as you know, the president is a climate denier, and so he's going to great lengths to make sure that sustainable energy projects that he has any input on are shut down. And so, we're kind of working through that challenge. Um, and then also, like again, a vigorous debate around the role of nuclear, in that mix.
What about that?
The thing about nuclear that is clean, but it's not sustainable, right? It's
Mhm.
clean, but it's not sustainable. We shut down Indian Point nuclear power plant a number of years ago under the Cuomo administration. I think that was a huge mistake. I've expressed the fact that I think that we should, repower that nuclear plant as opposed to creating new modular nuclear sites upstate. Obviously, I'm not the governor yet, and so I'm not announcing a run for governor or anything like this. But if the people want to make
For
me,
the record.
just holler at your boy. I'm ready. Um, um, there's the governor I think is looking at that and toying with the idea of doing it. We'll see whether we get any bids for that. But affordability, access to high speed broadband, generation, you could throw in there interconnections for small energy development projects and then showing up our grid, all part of that. The national grid is just in bad shape, and New York is no different. And so we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. So as we're developing sustainable energy assets to produce more electrons, we have to simultaneously upgrade our grid. And so that's those kind of 4, 5, 6 things have been the major work of the Energy and Telecom Committee in the state Senate.
Yeah, so changing issues, shifting issues dramatically here. I just want to get your thoughts. I'm just curious on the recent Democratic mayoral primary in New
Mhm.
York City, where you're based. Had huge ripple effects nationally. So why is it such a big deal? One of your colleagues, New York State Assembly member uh, uh, Zoran Mamdani, he's the one that won. So what's going to happen in the general, you think?
Oh wow, you're asking me to prognosticate? No,
Okay, well, or
the
let's
hot
just say,
takes.
why is this such a big deal? Everyone's talking about it.
No, I mean, look,
I
I
don't want
think,
to put you on the spot with the
yeah, no, 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 I'm already
prognostication.
in the spot now. Now you asked the question, so I don't answer the question now. I look like I'm dodging Charles's question. I ain't never scared, Charles, never scared. So let me just say this. I think that Zoran Mandani wins, for better or for worse,
Mhm.
right? Um, the I always say this is political science. There is a science, there are numbers to this, right? In New York City, the registration Democrat to Republican is 7.5 to 1,
Mm.
right? So it's overwhelmingly Democrat. And most people just vote on the Democratic line, right? This is a four-way general election with Assemblyman Zoran Mondani, who is a Democratic socialist as the Democratic candidate, and then you have former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's going to be an independent candidate, and then current Mayor Eric Adams, who's going to be an independent candidate, and then Curtis Sliwa is going to be the Republican. I think in that particular milieu of candidates, that the Democratic candidate just wins, right? Just because there's just far so many more Democratic votes.
Got
And even though obviously Eric and Andrew eat off Zoran's plate, I don't think that it's enough. Now, there's no math in which Curtis Leor wins, right? I think it's very uphill for the mayor. I think the mayor's having a hard time. I think he's given it an old college try, and he's out here working really hard and trying to you know, get his message out. He actually has not run the city poorly. I think his personal brand is probably a bigger issue than his actual management of the city. But I don't think people are able to get back by that. Andrew may have a little bit more of a path, but not much. And I don't see either one of them doing anything different than what they did early on in order to get people on board. Um, you know, Mondani didn't win the first election, the primary. Andrew lost it. He was up by over 20 points in almost every demographic. Um,
Mm,
poorly run campaign, lack of an ability to get out and connect with voters, and not messaging well on um, on his term as governor and talking about what he did. I mean, Andrew Cuomo is probably, in the top three governors in the history of the state of New York, if we look at his record and the things he's done. Not talking about how he comports himself. And much of the work that you saw against him and people going against him had nothing to do with his ability, his accomplishments, and more to do with his comportment. And I think that his inability to either get people on board and have them understand that he was going to comport himself in a different way, um, or challenge people's redefining of his legacy during pandemic, wound up being the 100,000 vote failure in the primary election. And for people outside of New York City, 100,000 votes is not all the votes in the world in New York. In New York City, we have 8 million people,
right.
and so that was clear. I mean, I represent 320,000, right? So for the price of a Senate seat, he could have actually won the election, right?
Mm,
Um, and so it's going to be interesting. And I also think that Zoran, and by the way, me and Zoran are not friends, right? And the Democratic Socialists have run somebody against me several times, right? But he was the first person to reach out to me, after the primary, and met with me and a group of Black elected officials in Brooklyn, called me personally, and at least try to work on the relationship, right? And that's all you could really ask for from any elected official, and have not seen that same energy or vigor from any of the other candidates, and some of them who I know much better. But I also think that it's a big deal, part because we've never had somebody just kind of walk off the street and become mayor, right? It's the largest city in the country. Uh, Assemblyman Mandani has only been in the legislature, I think, 4 years or 5 years.
mm,
He's 33 years old or something like that. He's very, very young. He's Muslim. He's from Queens. It's like all these things are things that kind of have never happened before. And so, I think that's why it took it. But the bigger issue is that the fact that he's a democratic socialist and has a very fundamentally different understanding about how government runs from the socialist and from everybody else, right? And some of the things that myself and other people are wary about is, the lack of relationship to the market, right? Because the socialists fundamentally believe that everything should be owned by the government, right? So I've spent a lot of time over the last number of years fighting with the democratic socialists over the notion of them of creating a mechanism and apparatus to buy every energy company so that the state can own it in whole, which frankly doesn't make any sense. It would cost billions upon billions of dollars and would not yield any better outcome than what we have. But they believe different, and so here we are. And so the criticism of Mondani's approach has been that one is that he's now messaging what he's doing as a policy job as opposed to a service delivery job. Having worked for the city, I can tell you now that the city of New York and running the city of New York as the mayor is a service delivery job, not a policy job. And much of what he's talked about from a policy perspective, frankly, is not within the wheelhouse of the mayor to do. And as a state legislator, he probably could have gotten some of those things done, and he didn't. So why would he be any more successful as mayor when he doesn't have a vote in the actual body? So um, so we'll see, what happens. I think the city is idiot proof. So I don't think he's going to come in and like ruin the city. But I do think it's going to take him a while to get his sea legs under him, figure out how you actually make service delivery work in a city that's as unwieldy as New York is, and figure out how do you coalesce people that you have alienated because of your comportment as a state legislator, and sometimes the hostile tactics that the Democratic Socialists use in order to win policy debates. So all of that makes it interesting. You've seen places like Minnesota also through they have more of a caucus process, I understand, that selected their Democratic Socialists as their mayoral primary winner. And we'll see. Like this has now sparked kind of a socialist movement across the country. The interesting thing will be how successful they are, and particularly in picking up congressional seats. And then you can wind up in Congress with the Tea Party slash MAGA people versus the socialists. And they kind of operate, although on different ends of the spectrum, with the same kind of tactics. And you really could if you think Congress is ground to a halt now, wait till you see that.
Hmm. Hey, one last question here, Senator, if I may. So whomever is selected to run New York City, they're going to be contending rather significantly with climate issues, with climate change. The city's getting hit, and you touched on that just a few moments ago with respect to your committee on energy issues and trying to get ready for the next generation, putting sustainable, resilient projects in place, et cetera. But then a city like that, especially in a district like yours, you have to contend with heat waves that are deadly, flooding is really significant, right? And so, and those issues also exacerbate public safety challenges, public health challenges. So, um, how does New York, how does a manager of New York City contend with that? How does the legislature like team up with the city? And also, just as a state, how do you contend with all of that?
Mhm. Good question. So first, we should understand that climate is a global problem. It's not a local problem.
Mm,
Right? You deal with it locally, but it's really a global problem. Until we get a multinational, um, agreement around reducing carbon and methane in our environment, we're stuck. To be honest with you, and you really need a lot of the large countries, the United States, the European Union, China, India, Russia, to come to some kind of agreement about what needs to be done, and actually doing it for us to start reversing it. And some people are arguing that we're beyond the tipping point already, and so that it's scary. And so at the same time, New York again does have the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which I believe is really about doing two things. One, getting ahead of the curve as it relates to these issues, but also providing leadership and showing states that there are lots of things we can do without the work of the federal government in order to get this done. Now, and hopefully we'll have a new federal administration in 3 years, or there's only, I can't believe it's only been 6 months. The trauma of it all, Charles. Um, but like in next 3.5 years, hopefully we'll have a new federal administration that's not a Republican one, and one that are not climate deniers, and we can kind of move down that path. In the meantime, I think that is really about looking at resiliency projects in the city of New York and in the state of New York, and understanding where the touch points are for climate related disaster, right? Whether it's flooding upstate New York, or flooding in some of the coastal areas in New York City, storms or heat waves. Starting to really do some work around that, and figuring out how to mitigate it. I actually passed a law about 2 years ago on what's something called the heat island effect. This is one of the hottest summers on record, and I probably bet that it will probably be the hottest summer on record ever. And so what you find in like places like NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, right? What we think about is the projects, right? So low income housing, where I grew up in the Bushwick houses, you have something called the heat island effect. You don't have a lot of trees, you have a lot of cement, a lot of brick is absorbing heat, and then it's radiating it. So on a day that maybe, let's say, 100 degrees in the city, in those communities is radiating 110, 120 degrees, right? And so significant heat. And you lose more people actually, believe it or not, in the heat than you do in the cold, right? And so this is a huge issue for people with respiratory problems, obviously elderly, with young children, infants. anybody who immune compromised. These these heat waves are literally sucking the life out of people. And we really have to figure out ways to mitigate that on the state and city level. To be honest with you, I don't think there has been enough of a focus on that. I think, again, especially on the energy side, we have been looking on the state level on how, the kind of the future of like how do we produce energy and simultaneously reduce our carbon and methane levels. Um, on the environmental side, I think that they have been doing some of the same at the same time, trying to maintain and improve our ecology. I don't think that it has been a city or state look at um, like how do we create resiliency in terms of a emergency response or preparation aspect of climate change and what is going to hit our city or
Mm. Well, all right. Thanks again, Senator, for joining us. I really appreciate this. That's it for this segment. I'm Charles Ellison, your executive producer and host. Let's thank our partner, the Council of State Governments East, for their continued support through the Council on Communities of Color, of which Senator Parker is a chair. Also, another warm round of gratitude to our other partner, the Civic Literacy and Media Influence Institute at Learn for Life, for making this possible. Diane Ellison is executive producer. Raven Robinson is senior producer. Until then, you can find this episode and more while subscribing to thebnote.com. Thanks for watching.